Thank you, Brett, for hosting and setting this meeting up. We appreciate it greatly. I'm sorry that I wasn't able to meet everyone in person in San Antonio, but this is the next best thing. Although I do not have my camera on because, well, there's 4 people in my house and 3 of them are trying to do school or work, and so we have a very limited bandwidth. So we'll keep this voice only. This meeting is being recorded and it will be available on our website and on the AARO website probably in the next couple of days. We're doing a second session, which is the same as this session tomorrow. So if you have to leave early or you want to just get more of the same information, feel free to join us tomorrow. If everyone would take a moment to mute your microphone, that would be great, and you can turn your camera off, although I don't mind seeing what you're doing from my desktop. I'm happy to report that everyone seems to be addressed appropriately. And we have some folks in the waiting room also, so I'll make sure they get admitted as they join. There we go. So I'm going to jump right in. The way I like to do this is I keep it kind of informal, though I do have notes here. I'm going to stop periodically. I hope to talk for just about 25 minutes or so, and then turn it over for questions and discussion. As you have questions on particular slides or things that I say, just feel free to send Brett a text message and he will call on you, and I can unmute your microphone, or you can unmute yourself. I believe I've allowed that to happen, and you can ask your question. So we're going to keep this informal, so don't be bashful about saying, hey, what about this, Mark? I'm happy to stop and talk to you about anything specifically. I have modified this presentation a little bit because I think that it's worth spending a little bit of time on state budgets and what's happening around the coronavirus. It's going to impact some of our approach, I believe, and it's good to start that conversation now. So we will do that. So let's just jump right in. First slide is, this is just a quick overview. Well, let me do this. Before I do that, let me say what we want to get covered in this webinar. So I want to just quickly go over how the grants are structured. And of course, what you all need to know are the amounts, the deadlines, the activities you can use with the grants, and any restrictions. So we're going to cover those basic things for sure. We're going to want to talk about the steps required to apply for the funds, and then the steps you'll want to do once you receive the funds. We'll get into some specific examples, and the second main purpose of this meeting isn't just to give you information, but to get information from you. This is a brand new grant program, and ASC has resources and will have resources every year going forward to provide grants to the states. So we're very committed to making sure that those grants meet your needs and make a difference. And so part of getting this kicked off is stakeholder engagement and listening and market analysis, and that's where I need all of you. So I'm very pleased that you're able to join us today for this call. Just quickly, the Appraisal Subcommittee, as you know, it monitors state appraisal agency requirements. It does compliance reviews. I gotta see if I can move the screen. Compliance reviews of the appraiser regulatory programs. It maintains the National Registry of Appraisers and AMCs. And then finally, and the most important thing, the thing that I really just want to talk to you about today is we make grants to the Appraisal Foundation to support the 2 boards and to the state and to you all, the licensing agencies. So the grants office is very small. It's me, because ASC is a fairly lean operation with only 11 or 12 employees, I believe. So I do get some help though, and so we have a couple of consultants, and we have Maria on our team who's going to be working with us. Our job is to help establish the funding priorities for the subcommittee. That means working with the subcommittee staff, its board, and its external stakeholders to figure out, well, how we want to spend this grant money. We issue the notices of funding availability. We call them NOFAs. You're going to hear me refer to a NOFA often. It is basically your roadmap and instructions for how to access funds through the ASC. fat finger on the mouse here. So we review the grant applications as they come in. We make funding recommendations and award the actual grants once the recommendations are approved by the ASC board. We also do a lot of back and forth here with each of the applicants, making sure your application meets all the requirements, that the budget is set correctly for allowable activities, and that it's sized correctly as well. We'll get into that. And then we train and support grantees on federal grant requirements. This is a really large part of what I'll be doing all year with support from our staff, is that once you accept these funds, we want to make sure that not only do you use them correctly, but you use them safely, so you don't get in trouble with the federal auditors, so that this does not become a hassle for you, so it doesn't feel like it's onerous to take this money. It should feel like the money is making a difference for you, and you can access and use it in a smart way that doesn't create a lot of burden or risk on the part of the grantee. And then, of course, we do the monitoring activities, which include site visits and audits, periodic check-ins, technical assistance. All of that kind of falls under the monitoring protocol. So that's the grants office functions. Now we've got eligible entities. So we have the Appraisal Foundation. Like I said earlier, they get support for the AQB and ASB, the two boards. They've also gotten support and a grant in the past to support the investigator training program. That is changing, and we'll talk about how and why that's changing in the context of the grants that the state appraiser certifying and licensing agencies, you all, can now receive. This is the heart of our conversation today, is a number 2, but there is a number 3, which is other. So you may periodically see that the ASC has got a grant open for something other than grants to the certifying agencies or to the foundation. And these will mostly be in the form of something we call a cooperative agreement. It's a type of hybrid between a contract and a grant that allows us to move the field forward using funds like in a procurement to do specific things, like maybe create a new curriculum, or maybe do a network of peer support for the states. There's a lot of activities that we would need support doing, and we would turn to a grant to do that. It would be a grant in support of the state appraising, certifying, licensing agencies, but not necessarily to them. I see folks are still coming into the waiting room, so I have to periodically stop and let them in. So a statutory authority for this is the first place we look to see if the kind of grants we're making are correct and what we can do within our authority. And the authority is fairly broad. It said it includes support for complaint processes, complaint investigations, and appraiser enforcement activities of agencies. It also includes support to submit data to the national registries. And these terms are very broad. So it's basically saying you can do, this is what you want to do, but how you do that is wide open. And that's kind of the point of this conversation today, is to introduce some of the ideas we think fall under these statutory authority and get some ideas from you. And then I think in general, activities that advance the goals of Title 11 broadly will find their way into our grants that we make to the states. So we're going to make two kinds of grants, and this is to Brent's point earlier, non-competitive and competitive grants. Every state and territory, there's 55 eligible entities that fall under the ASC's authority, are eligible to receive a non-competitive grant. That's what we're talking about here today. And what that means is that we will work with you to see that you get grant funds if you decide you want to apply for grant funds. And so you're not competing against your colleagues in your other states. What you'll be competing against is kind of a quality threshold. We want the applications and the activities that are supported with the grants to meet, to be of very high quality and have a true impact in your state. And as such, we will work with you to get your application and execution of that application to such a state that we think it meets that criteria, and you'll be able to get funds. The grants are likely going to be 3-year awards, meaning once we do an award, it'll be for 3 periods and have with 3 operating budgets, 1 for each fiscal year. the amounts for the awards annually will be between $25,000 and $120,000 per year. Now, that's a wide range, and I don't want everyone to walk away from this saying we're going to apply for $120,000 a year, because we don't have that much money. But what we do have is enough money for everyone to get something every year, to do some activities that would be supported every year by the grant. And then there's more money available on a case-by-case basis to do other kinds of projects that might be one-time projects. And we're going to get into those details about what these eligible activities might be. And then finally, on the deadlines, partially because of Corona, partially simply because not every state has the same capacity to apply for and administer these funds out of the gate, we're going to do rolling application deadlines. So what that means is you'll see in the NOFA, the Notice of Funding Availability, the first deadline, but 3 more deadlines, which will probably be, on the fiscal year quarterly calendar for the federal government, allowing you to put an application in at another point in time and receive funds. So we do not have to have everyone coming in at exactly the same time. And the second set of grants are competitive grants. And here, these will be a new Notice of Funding Availabilities. They'll be for pretty specific activities. They're not for everyone. We don't necessarily need 55 entities doing a demonstration grant or a special initiative. And so the activities around these are to be determined. The amounts of money are to be determined. But we're starting to collect ideas and things that we think might really make a difference for the field if we test them first. And so we would be doing that by anyone could apply, but we'd only be selecting a handful of folks, or maybe 1 or 2, or even 1 applicant to try something for us and see how it works. Brett, I'm going to stop right there for a minute and see if we have any questions from the audience.
Well, and I guess to make that easier, if you're going to text me a question, it'd be easier if I shared my cell phone. So if you want to write down this cell number.
Or Brett, you could actually let them text you right in the application, I think.
Okay.
That might be even faster. And you can just unmute yourself and talk. It looks like we have, how many folks do we have? We have 33 people in the meeting. I think we can manage that. So
sure.
if you have a question, let's just take a second and I'm happy to answer it before I keep going.
Any questions, anybody at this point?
Great.
Hey, Brett.
Oh, good.
Brett, this is Patricia in West Virginia. How are you doing?
Patricia, we're doing fine. Hope you're feeling safe.
Oh, everybody's fine here. Thank you very much. Okay, this is just a simple housekeeping one, but the PowerPoint presentation, is it going to be available to print off and refer to or just record?
Yes. So we will put up the recording so you can listen to it again, because this I'm saying a lot that's not on the screens, obviously, but the presentation itself will be available, and we should have an FAQ that goes with it as well that fills in some of the details, so you don't have to listen to the video. So we'll put that. Brett is offered to make that available on the AARO website, which I greatly appreciate, and we'll put it on our website as well.
Good. Okay. As like I said, I just like to keep the PowerPoint presentations because they're always good just to refer to. So you're saying it will be available on both of those websites?
Yes, we'll make it available along with the recording of the webinar.
Sounds great. Thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am.
And we'll have some other presentations that are on PowerPoint as well, especially the one related to kind of a grants 101, how to administer federal funds, and how to apply for, administer the grant. That's a lot more detailed PowerPoint, and that's one you'll definitely refer to more often. So I'm not going to say a lot about competitive grants. I want to just point out that they are out there. They're for innovation and demonstration purposes. It allows you, if you have a great idea or you think this would be something that the whole field could use, you should tell us about it and say, this is something that we've been thinking about for a while. This is this is the process or the problem we want to solve. Maybe you want to make an app so that so folks can access your information that you put in the registry via their phones or something like that. We would like to hear any idea that you have that you think might have greater applicability for the entire field, and talk to you about funding that idea. And then of course, part of this is you'll have to kind of test and disseminate conclusions and outcomes, or if there's a work product available, make it available to others so they can use it as well. This is the kind of creative stuff that not every single state has the bandwidth to manage, but someone might be very interested in pushing something forward, and we'd be happy to look at an investment to help that happen. And they'll have their own notice of funding availabilities and application deadlines. So we've covered kind of the fact that these are not competitive awards for you all, that we will work with you on your time frame to get an acceptable application in and get it funded. But one of the most important aspects of that is, well, what's allowable in terms of what can we pay for? And for most things that you're going to see in the budget, there's going to be a three-part test we do. This is from the OMB circulars. Is it allowable? Which means does the statute allow it? Does the policy of the ASC allow it? Does OMB think it's okay based on the circulars? And so that's the first thing we look at. And then we make sure it's allocable. And that means is, who should pay for this? Should we pay for all of it, or are you going to be using this for other functions in your office? So maybe we should cost share this, and someone else, the state agency, should pick up some of the cost. And then finally, is it reasonable? Is this a reasonable price to pay? Did you competitively let this contract? Is this consulting rate what the market rate should be for this person? And if it passes that test, then that's the three-part test, and we generally say that's a fine thing to have in your budget. Some of the things on a very broadly that we can cover, that includes staff, facilities where the staff are housed, equipment, supplies. In our world, supplies includes computers. They're low cost enough that it's not really equipment anymore. So it's certainly an allowable cost. Training, consultants, temporary staff, travel, all of those things can be covered in these grants. And we're going to give you some guidance on how to put that budget together in the NOFA. So, and we'll also give you some examples of eligible cost. And even on this call today, I hope that you have lots of questions about, hey, can we fund this, or can we do that? Because that will help kind of get the creative juices flowing, and as you think about how to use these funds. So again, the eligible activities. So we've been working on this for a while now, and we've been talking to folks in the field and amongst the staff at ASC. And so we have some ideas, including in the areas of technology, communications, training, travel, supplies. There are activities that I think that make a lot of sense right out of the gate that we would want to see, that we could see in applications from you. On the technology side, if you don't have the electronic connection to the registry, we can help you set that up. It's a one-time cost we could include in the grant. If you want to move from the current way you do it to an API linkage, which is basically a real-time link that allows the databases to talk to each other continuously, we can talk about that. If you want to send people travel to conferences like the AARO conference, for example, and that's an allowable cost. Training at the AARO conference or at any other conference, if it advances Title 11, those are going to be costs that are going to be allowable. Again, we can add to supplies in your office. We can do computer upgrades and other types of equipment that make you more productive. We can do software. We can do subscriptions to online software. We can support convening in your state for communication purposes. We can support development of a newsletter, which would be the staff or the contractor to help you write that and disseminate it. We can support, if you don't have a really good way of talking to everyone that you should be talking to in your state via email, and support the acquisition of a customer relationship management software or a CRM that would allow you to talk to them differently. So there's a wide range of activities here that that we're going to rely on you to tell us what you think makes the will make the biggest difference with the limited amount of money in your state that we can support. And so these are the categories we've come up with so far, but there are certainly probably other things that we can fund. But this is a starting point, and I'm going to roll back to this slide at the end of the presentation, and hopefully we can have some conversation around activities that might fall in these categories. The application process itself, like I said, you're going to receive it. The NOFA will be published. It'll say who the eligible entities are, when the deadlines are, the amount of money available, the types of activities we would like to see funded. We're going to ask for a short narrative, kind of a 1 to 3 page narrative about what you plan to do with the funds, and then a simple budget the form itself is a government approved form that you'll fill out. And that will be basically the extent of the application. You'll need to be in a couple of systems, including the system for award management called SAM. You'll have to have an active account there. There's a process of making sure that you have the right EIN associated with your account. We will walk you through that on a case-by-case basis to make sure that you have the SAM account correct. It's linked to the correct bank account, etc. And once you have the SAM set up, then there's some post-award stuff that I'll talk about in a minute as well. But that's on the front end. You'll need that notice of funding availability, which include application instructions, and then also your SAM account before you can apply. The timeline, always the fun part, right? So we're May and June, and this timeline has slipped a little because of Corona, and it could still be adjusted. But this is what we're planning right now. For right now, for this coming month, May and June, we've got the market analysis and stakeholder engagement, which is what this call is. We want to publish the NOFA. We want to work with each of you that are planning to hit this first deadline for funds to get your SAM account created and something called your account in the PMS system. It's an unfortunate acronym, but it's a great government acronym, isn't it? So that system actually works pretty well, and you'll need an account there to actually manage your grant when you get it. And then we will do technical assistance calls in May and June as well around the actual application itself. So as you have questions about how to complete it, what to put in it, what costs might or may not be allowable, we'll try to front load as much of that technical assistance as we can so that you submit a fairly high quality application that doesn't require a lot of back and forth. In August, we'll have more technical assistance calls, a couple more webinars like these. Then the applications will be due sometime in August. That's our goal currently. And then in September, we'll be reviewing those proposals, making recommendations to our board, and getting final funding decisions done, and then making the actual awards. And in between the recommendations to our board and when the award is executed, there will be a time when we're talking to you about the specifics in your application. I suspect folks will apply for much more money than we have available, so we will probably be in a process of paring down activities and support across the board. It's just what happens in this process, and we'll find other things that can't be funded or shouldn't be funded, and we'll work with you to adjust those budgets in that negotiation phase. So that's our timeline for awards. The requirements on the federal side. So, this is the first time that your agency or group will probably be receiving federal funds, and so there's a lot of steps involved in making sure that happens, and in making sure the awards are correctly administered. And the first thing we look is something we turn to is the circulars. This is published by the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, and it is really the roadmap for all federal assistance in the form of grants. And so we will refer to it a lot. It is where it's the audit standards oftentimes for our grants. It's thick. If you've never looked at it, it's not something you can just pick up casually and figure it out. We will provide you kind of the top 10 things to be looking at there. We will refer to it often when you ask us questions, and we'll generally help you kind of ferret through that. But when you countersign your award agreement, you're basically agreeing that you will manage your funds to the circulars, and so it's a very important document. so we will do the training and technical assistance around this and around all grant administrative requirements for the award. Again, with an eye towards making sure it's not onerous, but that you do this in a non-risky way and you don't get in trouble later on in an audit. And then the award management system, which I mentioned, which is through HHS, we have a contract with them. That system is where you'll withdraw grant funds from your account as you need them. It's where you'll submit your financial and progress reports on a biannual basis. It is your go-to place to access funds and submit reports. And it's it's a nice interface and it's fairly straightforward. I think that it will make your lives easier and ours too. And that's the post-award grants management. And then, so that's the kind of, I wanted to just run through that stuff. There's a lot of detail I didn't cover yet, but I will cover it as we go through questions and answers. So Brett, I'm gonna turn this over to you and everyone else and just be available to answer questions as needed here.
Thanks, Mark. I appreciate it. Again, with the group we have, we can probably take just questions through the microphone. So if you've got a question, unmute your microphone and ask away. If you want to ask a question more anonymously, you can scroll your mouse at the bottom of your screen. You'll see a small chat box and you could send your question directly to me and I'll pose it to the group. But Mark, one question that came to my mind that I'll ask on behalf of everybody. The coronavirus probably will lead to budget shortfalls. Is there any way that this grant fund can help replace some of the lost budget funds due from just lost revenue in the various states?
So this is a really tricky question, and I'm glad that you bring it up because it's worth spending some time on. Generally speaking, our policy is we do not want these very limited dollars to be supplanted. In other words, to supplant non-federal dollars. So it can't be a simple, in a normal budget times, it can't be a simple substitution, right? Now, every state legislature likes to take, when they hear about federal grant coming in, they like to reduce state agency budgets by the amount of the grant, right? So that they can use that money elsewhere. We will actively discourage that. And in fact, we will tell you in the grant agreement that you can't simply substitute federal for non-federal money, or the other way around. And we do that mostly by just insisting that the activities that we cover are new activities or in addition to what you do on an annual basis. That's the general rule in the non-corona time. This year is going to look a lot different. So I've been giving this a lot of thought, and I have some initial ideas about it. And I think that we're probably going to take this on a kind of a case-by-case basis with the states. So there's not enough money here to replace full-time staff folks that might get cut because of state budget cuts. But if you're in a situation where the state simply has cut across the board, you know, I've heard as much as 10 or 15 or 20% in some cases lately, and all of a sudden there is simply no travel out of state where the year before you did travel out of state to go to a conference. We are not going to say you can't use our money to travel to a conference because that's the planning, because the money simply is not there on the state level. So it's a slippery slope. We don't want to get in a situation where you can't claw back money eventually when things get right-sided. So it might be a temporary situation where we say for this year, because absent using the grant money, you simply cannot travel to this conference or do this training or send investigators, you know, to the investigator training. Fine, you can use the grant money for that. But we're gonna have to be careful there, and we're gonna have to make sure that what we do around this is with the understanding that when things get back to some kind of normal or some kind of regular budgeting where you're back to your full budget, that we use the money for activities that was not previously supported with state funds. Does that make sense, Brent?
It does, thank you. And again, I'll keep asking some questions that come to my mind and other people can jump in as need be. In the slide, and I think in your discussion, you indicated that you and your team would provide support of how for the states to remain compliant with receiving the grant funds. Will that support be ongoing from year to year? Of course, at some point the states will get the hang of it, but with turnover in state agency staffs, will you and your team provide ongoing support for the states to remain compliant in working with those circulars?
So it's a great question, and it's ongoing support. So we will have ongoing technical assistance providers, folks that you can call up and ask a question to, or try to figure something out that isn't asking me directly, or you can always call me. And so we basically, and when new folks come into the office, so the two key positions, of course, are the director or the manager of the grant, the one that signs the grant. But the other key person is your financial person, the one that makes sure the expenditures are coded correctly, that the correct paperwork is in place, that the correct procurement procedures were followed. All of that financial person has to know how to manage federal funds. And we may do a special training for them if they've never done it, or have a PowerPoint available to them, or have our consultants available to them on an ongoing basis. If that person changes or gets reassigned, or you have a new person, then we would do that again. So we don't ever want to be in a situation where you have grant funds that weren't being administered by someone that knows how to administer federal funds.
Thank you. Again, I'll just ask another question. When the grant process is set up, and say, and I live in North Carolina, and I'm not with the North Carolina board, but I live in North Carolina, but we've been granted X number of funds. Do we pay for whatever the expense is first and they get reimbursement, or do we get reimbursement ahead of the expense? And if we have to pay for it first, how long before we get reimbursed for that allowable expense?
Right. So the system I referenced at HHS, it's called the payment management system, allows you, and by the circulars, you can draw down the funds up to 3 days in advance of when you need them. So you could get the funds in real time right to your bank account simply by asking for them. There's no review of expenditures. There's no kind of approval on our part. Our approval is at the beginning. We say, we agree with you. These are the activities that you say you're going to do. They're all allowable. Go ahead and do them. And then you execute the grant and get the money as you need it during the course of the grant period. So it can either be you can do it monthly if you want and reimburse yourselves if you got the cash flow to do that, or you can do it as you need it for upcoming expenditures within 3 days. There's no limit on the number of times you can go in there and withdraw funds. And it's a fairly straightforward process.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions they'd like to ask Mark?
Brent, this is Don. Mark, I am the director in North Carolina, so it just happened to. But my question is a lot of these seem to be things that could be allowable might involve technology, computer support, software, etc. Would it be up to you said something about you would measure it against, what's a reasonable cost for these type of services? Mm-hmm. If we had, let's just say we have a current provider and we just said, okay, they charge us X to do this project and we submit it, is that all, or do we have to go out and say get 3-5 quotes? And
so it's a great question, and what we're gonna want you to do first and foremost is to follow your own office procedures, right? So if you have state requirements for how you do procurement, you should be following them. So if you have a contractor that you've competitively let a contract with, and you want to pay for it with some of our grant funds, that's fine. You don't have to go back out and re-quote it or rebid it. What you should probably avoid is if you're using procurement methods other than state-approved methods, or if they're non-competitive methods, you probably should call and ask us about that, and we can talk it through.
Well, one thing I've found with a lot of this, especially with software and agency-specific stuff, is sometimes it's hard to even find a good match. So it's like, trying to find 3 matches is, when we're an autonomous board, we don't have quite the same bid process that the state has. So, you know, normally we're looking more for fit than we're looking for, you know, not to say we're not looking, we consider price in the whole thing when we're looking at it, but fit might be more important than lowest number.
So we have to stop and look and see what it is that you're buying. If you're buying a software subscription for seats in Zoom or something like that, then it's fairly easy for you to find, you know, to look at the prices of a couple of systems against the functionality and make a selection, and then document that prior to using grant money to pay for it. That's pretty straightforward. If it's a contractor you're using and you have a rate for them, you just have to make sure the rate is market.
Right.
And so it's well, and there are some rates that we can share with you that would be the usual and customary paid for on a grant, and you shouldn't exceed those. So we can help you kind of navigate those waters. If it's a big build and you've asked for a couple $100,000 to build your, you know, the linkage to the registry, for example, we are going to expect that there's some kind of competitive bid process, unless you have a contract in place already that was competitively led.
Okay.
Hey,
Any other questions?
Mark, Brent, it's Ann Pettit in Ohio.
Good morning.
Hi, Ann.
Good morning, gentlemen. Thanks, Mark, first and foremost, for this presentation. This was great. My question is one of clarification. You talked about proportionate, what do I want to say, expenditures. My question is, let's say that, like Ohio, umbrella agency, I have folks who theoretically could be doing appraisal investigations and real estate investigations, home inspection investigations. Were we to get a grant, we need to ensure that we are either using the funds specifically and wholly for the appraiser program, and or that we show the proportionate match from our funds, let's say the real estate operating fund. Is that correct?
In some cases, that would be correct. But for example, if you want that investigator to go to an investigator training course, we would pay for the entire thing, because that's the, you know, that portion of his time is on, you know, investigations related to your work on appraisals. So that would be fine. If you were asking us to pay for a temporary investigator to cover a backlog, and they're going to be working in 3 areas, not just the real estate appraisal, then, you know, we'd pay for a third of their time. So some things that are direct costs that are, where their time is going to be used expressly for, on the stuff related to the appraisals, then it's 100%. That's not an issue. It's the other things that we need to look at allocability.
Thank you. I think that'll help everybody understand where there's an umbrella agency. And also, you just mentioned direct costs. Are there allowances for indirect costs?
So yes, and I'm not sure exactly how we're going to handle that yet. It's likely that none of the boards already have a negotiated indirect cost rate with the federal government. It's kind of a process to go through to get it, and since you don't have other federal money, you wouldn't have done it. So we will probably allow you to make an election of a certain percentage of the grant as indirect cost, and then so that's just available to you know, to spend as you need on other things.
Thank you. That's helpful to us, and I'm sure you as well. Thanks, Mark.
Sure.
Mark, this is Brent again. You know, this is a new process for all of us, and we'll compile, with your help and your staff's help, a grant request looking out 3 years. Because this is a new process, there'll be a learning curve. As we get into it, is it possible for the requested items to be covered to evolve or, you know, change over time, where in year 2 we ask for X, Y, Z, but we've come to realize we really need A, B, C.
So yes, and so first of all, we can always amend a budget, and second of all, each year you're going to give us a new operating budget for that fiscal year. And so when you do that, we can make changes. So when we say it's a 3-year grant period, what we're looking for, what we're going to assign to you is what we want is an operating budget for the first year and estimates for years 2 and 3 without the detail. So say you ask for $25,000 and you decide in year 2 and 3, you're going to, it's about the same. So we'll ask for $75,000 total over 3 years. So we have an operating budget of $25,000 by line item for the first year. And all this will be in the instructions. And just placeholder amounts, 25 for year 2 and year 3. Well, when year 2 rolls around and you submit your application to renew, to keep your grant going, we're going to want a year 2 budget and activities. Whatever you didn't spend in year 1 will roll into year 2. You don't lose it. And you may at that point decide that these are some better activities that you want to do, and you would propose them and we would approve that. So you have you're not locked into a 3-year set of activities at all. You're locked into basically 1 year, and even that can be changed depending on circumstances. If you need to make an amendment to your budget, or you need to move money between line items, that's allowable up to a certain extent, even without asking us. So that all that guidance will be in the notice.
Thank you. And my next comment will be addressed to all the state regulators on the call. The ASC has asked us to really work in partnership with them for this initiative going forward. Part of how all of you can help is as you submit your grant request, and you certainly don't need to share that with AARO, but as these new programs and things are put into place, it would be wonderful if you could share that with both AARO and the ASC about, we did this and it worked really, really well, or we tried this idea and the payback was not as significant as we had hoped. And as that information is shared in both directions, we'll certainly get the word out to the other states that said, hey, Ohio did this with some of their grant funds and it was wonderful. So please share, what works and what does not work. And it's going to be a two-way street of communication. So thank you for your participation.
Brett, I have a couple other things I'd like to cover. Just as we kind of talk a little bit about some of this, when we really glossed over some of these categories like training, for example. So we do the investigator training now, and the big shift here that everyone's going to have to get their arms around is that we want the states to have more autonomy and more decision making about how they spend funds that come from the registry fees. So what we hope to have is be supporting not just the investigator training in the future, but as we support that, it will be available, but each state would have to determine and then spend their grant money to send folks to it. So or they may decide they want to send folks to a different training. We would like to eventually see a whole catalog of new training developed, everything from training board members to training staff, to doing more investigator training, to maybe a training on how to regulate and oversee AMCs, kind of this next catalog of courses and that we would like to make available through grant money, but have folks then have the resources through their own individual grants to send folks to those trainings. So this is really an exercise in giving some additional autonomy and decision-making and resources pushed to the state level. And so we are collecting those ideas as well. So when I gave you that other category up there for the eligible entities, we are going to be looking to some third parties to help us develop some of this curriculum in the future that builds off the success of the investigator training program and moves us into other areas. And that can be even things like new manuals or succession planning, like around succession planning, or how to recruit, train, retain your investigators. It could be, is another example that came up the other day. So if you have those ideas and you want to see them make their way into, an example of an eligible, an allowable cost, make sure you share that with Brent or me directly, and we'll make sure that we're there and that it makes it into the notice. let's see. Oh, a little bit on the technology side too. So here's how I envision this going. There will be things in your grant application that I think that just as kind of a base amount of money you should count on every year from the ASC, and I think that these are things that are around moving the field forward. So they're around convening people, going to trainings. So there's travel, there's conference fees, there's specialized training for your members that might be available through any number of organizations, including AARO. All of that is there for you, and you should have money every year to do that. And it's not a lot of money though. We're talking maybe between $25,000 and $50,000 a year to do those activities. And then there's other activities you might want to do that I would consider one-time activities. So the technology builds to make sure you have really cool way to access the registry. Or maybe if you want to, I would love to do an app that gives you and your appraisers some flexibility in how they get information into the registry, for example. Maybe it's the cost of it, developing that and then customizing it for your state. There are lots of things that we would say, that's kind of a one and done. It moved you forward. Maybe it's developing a set of manuals that you don't have currently. Okay, that's done. You'll share them with other folks. But so you end up with a grant budget that has a set of costs that are there just every year ongoing, where we move a portion of the registry fees right back to the states. And then another set of activities that are special activities that we're only need to fund maybe over 1 or 2 year period of time. And then of course the third set is all that demonstration and innovation stuff that we really will test with just a few folks until we think we have a product ready that we can get to everybody. And then we would use some grant monies to make sure that gets disseminated, and you can use your grant money to figure out how to use it if you wanted to.
Thank you, Mark. Any other questions out there? Okay. Mark, that may be it.
So I just want to thank everybody for tuning in today. We're going to do this again tomorrow. Like I said, the presentation, the PowerPoints, the recording, some FAQs will all come up and be available on our websites for you to review. I also want to just take a moment to introduce a couple of folks that are on the call. We do have Mike Kennefick, I believe, and Peg Rosenberry. They're two contractors that have worked closely with the ASC in this grant making world. Peg will be working with you on making sure you get your SAM account and the account to the payment management system set up, and so that you're ready to receive funds. She will also be a good resource as you're applying. Mike Kennefick is our expert on the circulars and on grant administration. He has provided technical assistance directly to grantees for years. He is your advocate and will be someone that keeps you out of harm's way and makes this easy for you. Both of them, their contact information will be available through me and on our website. They will be great resources for you as we go through this process together. And so I'll sign off now. I just want to, again, thank everyone for participating. Don't hesitate to get Brent your questions or contact me directly. It's just mark@asc.gov. I should have put that on the slide here. I will do that for tomorrow. And thank you very much. Brent, I will turn it over to you for any last words, and then we will sign off.
Sure. Mark, one of the questions came in. Okay. You'll provide training in addition to the agency staff. Some of the, in some of the larger states, they may have fiscal or financial people that are working out of a financial department that are kind of assigned to that agency. Will you provide training for them to help keep them out of grant jail?
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll have a PowerPoint presentation set up just for fiscal people. They will have their own point of contact and ability to call us and talk to us about issues. We will have a direct line to those people in those offices.
Thank you. As Mark offered, if anybody on this call would like to also participate in tomorrow's webinar, just shoot me an email and I will send you the registration link that you can sign in. Much like today, you would register and get that confirmation email, which would expedite you logging in tomorrow. The call tomorrow is 2 p.m. Eastern. But again, if anybody wants to sit through, the presentation will be virtually identical, but obviously the Q&A may flow a little differently. And our hope is to post both full recorded webinars on both the ASC and the AARO website in just a few days. And we may also generate an FAQ written document out of both webinars as well. So any last questions? With that, again, Mark, we thank you so much for presenting this information today, and we look forward to working with you in the coming weeks and months.
Likewise, everybody. Thank you and have a great afternoon. Stay safe.
Stay safe.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.